Hey guys, welcome to another episode of You're the Cure. I'm Dr. Ben Edwards. Today I'm breaking down Tom Cowan's interview from last week. Man, Dr. Cowan went into some deep places and lots of places where I didn't think we were going. He always blows my mind. I've been listening to Dr. Cowan for over 10 years now, and he never ceases to amaze me. But I'm going to connect some dots. I'm going to finish that conversation and connect some dots, the whole heart disease, heart attack, cholesterol theory, all that. We're going to get into that a little deeper and try to bring some clarity to that. Also going to talk about the whole sunscreen and increased risk of skin cancer a little bit more. I got an article in my email today that just really stood out to me from the TMA, Texas Medical Association. I'm actually going to read you the article here in a second. First, announcements real quick. Don't forget, Need Your Cure, from fear to flourish, at the Oxford Conference Center, August 14th and 15th. You can go to needyourcure.com for tickets. Going to be a great conference. Has a great team out there that always puts on great speakers. Need, K-N-E-A-D, as in need the bread. So needyourcure.com. Check that out. I'm honored to be speaking there. And then in October, I'm going to be back in Mississippi, in South Haven, Mississippi, with Dr. Alan Williams and his crew. Their first annual conference, Regenerative Ag Conference, human health, soil health, animal health, gut health from a kingdom perspective. It's going to be awesome. EttaHillsFarm.com. That's E-T-T-A hillsfarm.com. There's also going to be a farm tour on the third day, but that's October 8th and 9th in South Haven. And I'm excited to be going there. And then the next weekend up in Washington, D.C. at the Omni Hotel, Omni Shoreham Hotel, October 16th through 18th, Wise Traditions. It's always a big conference, huge lineup, and amazing food, most importantly, Wise Traditions type food. So that'll be great. Check it out at wisetraditions.org. Okay, guys, I'm actually going to start with this article. I got some questions this past week on sunscreen that I mentioned last week, increasing your risk of skin cancer. This huge study came out, over 400,000 people in the study. I'm going to read two articles for you, so bear with me. And this isn't to call anyone out. This is simply to contrast, to help you, the listener, the patient, understand doctors' perspectives. You know, a doctor can only counsel you and teach you and tell you things from what he's been taught, from what he knows, what he's learned. So where are the sources of our learning from? And is it the full truth, the full perspective? So there's different perspectives in these two articles. Obviously, I'm going to point out that I think one article has a perspective that's a little more complete, and a little more thoughtful. I'd even say some common sense and critical thinking, which actually doctors are kind of trained out of that. We kind of can't think. We have to go to PubMed and look for meta-analysis and review studies, systemic reviews, and we can kind of only do what all the double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials tell us to do. But anyways, listen to the contrast in these two articles. So this first one is from the TMA, Texas Medical Association. That's the state version, Texas version of the AMA. And so this goes out to doctors. The title of the article: with summer sun exposure, keep patients on guard for skin cancer. You know, I'm all for that. Skin cancer is no fun, and melanomas can be quite deadly. So I'm all about screening for skin cancer, but even more so preventing skin cancer. Here's an article. Out in West Texas, where the sun-splashed scenery is as beautiful as it is dangerous, oil field workers, ranchers, and day laborers often aren't focused on skin cancer, a discomforting reality for local physicians. Texas oncology data project roughly 6,000 new cases of melanoma in 2026. Dermatologists say regular visits, a watchful eye from primary care physician colleagues, and sun protection can benefit patients, especially those who work or spend time outdoors. In Lubbock, doctors have taken action. For years, Lubbock dermatologists Brent Polger and Keith Wisniewski have made the 85-mile drive southwest to Denver City, specifically to treat patients for melanoma and basal cell carcinoma. In June, their practice partner, Dr. Ashley Sturgeon, made her first trip to Snyder, roughly 80 miles southeast of the hub city, and saw 18 patients on her first day. We're not just popping pimples out here, Dr. Sturgeon said. Their work reflects a high priority for medicine. The Texas Medical Association has advocated for increased education and awareness campaigns targeted at workers with high risk sun exposure to promote skin cancer prevention, early detection, and treatment. Dr. Sturgeon says the younger generation has progressive skincare routines, and most skin cancers can be treated or removed if caught early. This is one area where social media has helped us, she said. Still, just such a there's just as much ignoring of skin cancer as there has ever been. It's important to say, stay with your dermatologist, but where the first appointment, we are the first appointment that gets cut when it hits the fan or other health issues get serious. A chair of the dermatology program at the Texas Tech University Health Science Center, Michelle Tarbox, MD, wishes more primary care physicians did complete skin exams. Many do, she says, but general practitioners are usually just focused on the high frequency areas like the hands, the neck, and the face. One of the things that was drilled into me in my training in my residency program at Cleveland Clinic was that you look at the patient from top of their scalp through their hair all the way down their body, in between their fingers and toes until you get to the completeness of the exam, Dr. Tarbox said. Scalp melanoma has a higher mortality risk than a melanoma of similar thickness elsewhere on the body. It's also an area where patients struggle to examine themselves, which is why skin cancer education is taught at most beautician schools and hairdressing academies. Dr. Tarbox speaks about these and other skin issues extensively on her Dermosphere, a bi-weekly dermatology podcast that she co-hosts. For patients who must be in the sun, dermatologists encourage their physician colleagues to regularly recommend protective measures like broad spectrum sunscreen, long sleeve shirts, pants, and wide brimmed hats. That includes protecting the often ignored ears and lips. One overlooked protective covering might be what Dr. Tarbox jokingly calls the Sam Elliott mustache, based on the famous actor's iconic look. She reviewed data back in 2019 that mustaches decrease the carcinogenesis, the formation of cancer cells, on the lower lip, according to a study published in the Journal American Academy of Dermatology. We take a lot of skin cancer off the lower lip, Dr. Tarbox said. A mustache shelters your lower lip from that radiation. It's like a tiny umbrella. For more information about TMA's resources about cancer, please see the Cancer Control and Prevention page online, which I did. And it really promotes sunscreen and, long sleeves and get in the shade and don't burn and that kind of thing. And I agree with all that, minus the sunscreen. So that's a great article. I agree. People that are in the sun a lot and they're not taking care of their terrain, they have not stewarded their antioxidant enzyme systems in their skin cells. They don't have appropriate saturated fat in their cell membranes of their skin cells. And instead, they have seed oil fat lining their skin cell membranes and other things. They're going to be at higher risk of skin cancer. And the earlier you catch it, the better. No doubt about it. But now let's read this other article. Again, the point is just contrasting these two articles. And this article is from Focal Points on Substack, an independent media outlet, which I highly recommend. The name of this article is Study Finds Sunscreen Use Linked to Higher Risk of Multiple Skin Cancers. A 470,000 plus person study found sunscreen users face dramatically higher risk of melanoma, basal cell carcinoma, and squamous cell carcinoma, even after accounting for major skin cancer risk factors. Author of this article is Nicholas Holscher, MPH, June 9th, 2026 at 3:24 p.m. Here's the article. A UK Biobank study involving over 470,000 people found that individuals who reported using sunscreen more frequently had substantially higher risk of multiple skin cancers, even after researchers accounted for major confounding factors like age, sex, skin type, tanning ability, sunburn history, sun lamp use, and time spent outdoors. The findings are worrisome. For melanoma, 292% higher risk. That's relative risk. Basal cell carcinoma, 140% higher relative risk. Squamous cell carcinoma, 126% higher relative risk. The researchers categorized sun protection habits from never or rarely to always and found that the strongest associations among the most frequent sunscreen users. In other words, the more sunscreen use reported, the higher the observed skin cancer risk. This was an observational study only, meaning it cannot prove sunscreen directly caused cancer. However, the study was also not a simplistic comparison of random sunscreen users versus non-users. Researchers statistically accounted for many of the biggest known skin cancer risk factors, including skin color, hair color, tanning ability, childhood sunburns, tanning bed exposure, outdoor time, age, and sex. Even after all that, the association remained. Many chemical sunscreens contain hormone disruptors that are rapidly absorbed into the bloodstream, including compounds like oxybenzone, octocrylene, and homosalate. Some formulations have also been found contaminated with benzene, a known human carcinogen. And then there is the vitamin D issue. Sunlight is how the human body produces vitamin D, a hormone precursor involved in immune regulation, cellular repair, inflammation control, and cancer defense. People who never receive sunlight exposure without sunscreen are likely to become vitamin D deficient. And I'm going to insert my own commentary here. And a pill, synthetic version of a vitamin D pill, isn't the same. So you can't just make up for that deficiency by popping a pill. Back to the article. That does not mean people should recklessly burn in the sun. Sunburns are clearly harmful. Aim for sensible sunlight exposure. Spending enough time in the sun reaps the benefits without reaching the point of burning. If you'll be out in the sun for hours on end during midsummer, consider opting for zinc-based mineral sunscreens rather than heavily absorbed chemical formulations. The takeaway is not to fear sunlight, but to respect it. Okay, so those are the two articles. Obviously, the Substack article by Nicholas Holscher would be one that I would want to republish and promote and talk about. It seems a little more balanced, a little more empowering, a little more well-rounded. I'd say truthful, not that the other one was lying, but it was missing a big, big important piece of the puzzle. And doctors are trained, like I said earlier, to follow guidelines and follow heads of departments and organizations and committees and guideline boards, stuff like that. They trust that all these institutions and journals and different advisory committees are looking at all the data, keeping up to date, and taking that comprehensive, holistic approach to things. But conventional medicine, the training is actually pretty narrow, and the advisory recommendations that come down from various committees tends to be tainted to that more narrow lens. Now, when someone like Tom Cowan shows up and you have the liberty to think outside the box, or the gifting to do that, and the liberty to do that, and the freedom to do that, and you want to do that, and you're naturally curious, and you have a thought such as, well, all of our great-great-great-grandparents were in the sun all day long. Like the other article mentioned, oil field workers and outside workers, but we used to all be outside all the time. Because we had to go get water out of the creek or at the well. We were in our gardens and farms getting our food, or we were hunting, gathering for food, or we were washing our clothes down in the creek on the washboard, or we were outside a lot. And there wasn't skin cancer, or very, very little skin cancer compared to today. It's very, very prevalent. So just that kind of thought, curiosity, would make you want to dig a little deeper. If skin cancer is a new modern thing, but we're actually inside more than our ancestors, I wonder if there's something else going And also thinking about the vitamin D, which Nicholas's article talked about. Vitamin D is such an essential component for immune health. It turns on so many different genes related to the immune system. And it's been well documented with melanoma and the association between low vitamin D and melanoma. So the point is, there's just more to the story usually. And if we don't keep an open mind, and I would say, honestly, it comes down to respecting the design. And that's a big problem with conventional medicine because its foundation is Darwinian evolutionary biology, that basically we're just not evolved perfectly enough. So we're going to have breakdowns in the system because it's this evolving system, survival of the fittest, and these diseases just kind of come out of nowhere and not much. The diet and lifestyle part of things, as far as a root cause factor and the epigenetic influence on the genes, that's really not stressed or taught much. Nutrition obviously is not taught in med school, but neither a lot of these other diet and lifestyle aspects. And so we just have to be aware of that. And of course, my encouragement to the medical community that or doctors that reach out to me, I don't purposely go try to change a system that doesn't want to be changed or isn't asking to be changed. But when I am asked by somebody that starts to recognize, a physician in particular, PAs, nurse practice who recognize, and medical students too reach out all the time, and they recognize this narrow training is not producing the best outcomes, and they want a broader training. And it's awesome because then they're given permission to think outside the box and to go with that creative, critical thinking, like Dr. Tom Cowan put on display for us in the podcast last week. No such thing as atoms. He does just say some stuff that are just thoughts. Maybe I'm wondering if, but isn't that how all great ideas start, with just a thought, and then you go try to prove it out with a theory? But actually, Dr. Gerald Pollack's book on this question about atoms, there is a whole rethinking of the atomic structure and the electron cloud, and because we're starting to recognize that when we look at stuff through a microscope, that's a static. Number one, you got to dehydrate this stuff. The way we just capture images, electron microscopes or old school microscopes or any kind of microscope, you're taking it out of a living system. You're denaturing it somehow, just like he talked about trying to identify a virus, and you're going through and 8 washes of acetone or whatever it was he said last week. We draw conclusions in isolation outside of a living system. And in that living system, we're all unique. Just our microbiome alone has a unique impact on our genetics and our genetic expression, on our ability to digest and absorb supplements and nutrients. So even one supplement in a study that looked to be good, well, in your microbiome, it may be digested and absorbed totally different. Our thoughts, that electron gun experiment, the observer effect, when this electron is shot out of this electron gun onto a photographic paper that can capture that energy. And when the observer's watching that gun versus leaves the room and doesn't watch the gun, affects where that electron moves in space. It's called the observer effect. That's a whole nother show. I was just listening to a Dr. Jennings, psychiatrist. Hopefully can get him on the show. He's got a book called The God-Shaped Brain. But in this interview, which I highly recommend, you can go listen to it, Taylor Welch, The Deep End. Look up Dr. Jennings. But anyways, Dr. Jennings explained in this interview, the neurons in the brain, they're made of microtubules. And the microtubules only have 2 shapes, kind of like your hand can be open or closed. Open palm, closed palm. These tubes that make up your nerves, that make up your brain, have 2 positions they can be in. And he equated it kind of like with computer software. The zeros and ones and zeros. All these programs are just some combination of zeros and ones. But this binary thing, open and closed. So these microtubules come in 2 shapes that move back and forth to these different shapes. But the water that flows through that tube, and these are microscopic tubes, it's a crystalline water, kind of like that structured water we talked about last week with Dr. Cowan, I imagine. But that water's resonated in a certain frequency, like a crystal glass and an opera singer tuning fork. So there's a frequency, and the frequency is affected by our thinking. So your thoughts change the frequency of that water, that changes the shape of that water, that changes the shape of the neuron, that initiates the firing of all the signaling going through the brain. Your heart beliefs, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. It's just absolutely incredible. So the conventional mindset of Darwinian-based biology, evolutionary biology foundation versus the kingdom and design and God, who's loving, created us for a purpose and put a piece of him in us, and we're a spirit housed in the flesh with a soul. If we don't understand soul versus spirit and how that impacts the physical, and like Dr. Jennings in that interview talked about so well, he goes into spirit, soul, body. He goes into our thoughts and our ability to choose, and the fact that God set up certain laws. We're going to talk about some of those in the heart explanation here in just a second. And we got to understand the laws. Well, there are health laws in place, and if we don't recognize them or know about them and steward them the right way, there's going to be sowing and reaping impacts from lack of knowledge and lack of stewardship. Anyways, just want to point those two articles out with the main point, guys, being cancer comes when your cells are so toxic. The mitochondria is so toxic. Your energy producing part of that cell is so inefficient. It has to flip to anaerobic metabolism, which is a form of energy production that is so inefficient. It's 2 miles per gallon. You get 2 ATP energy molecules for every molecule of sugar that comes in. Highly inefficient. Makes tons of free radical exhaust. It's the most inefficient carburetor possible in the human cell. And that's a last ditch effort of that cell to survive. That mitochondria is so damaged. It can no longer utilize sugar and fat for fuel in the presence of oxygen. Really, it's an inability to metabolize oxygen is what it is. That's what Dr. Morley Robbins talks about so much in all those interviews I did with him, the inability to move that oxygen molecule down the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. When you can't do that anymore, your mitochondria says, okay, I'm bailing out on aerobic metabolism using oxygen for energy production. We're going anaerobic. It's like you're pulling that eject button almost. The jet's going down. Let's flip the switch to anaerobic metabolism without oxygen. This goes back to Dr. Warburg in the 1930s, 20s or 30s, I think it was, Otto Warburg, the Warburg effect, got the Nobel Prize. When that cell is so toxic, it's got to flip that switch to anaerobic metabolism, burning sugar for fuel without oxygen. That makes so much lactic acid and other byproducts that are toxic to that cell. That's a cancer cell. That cancer cell, that's a last ditch effort for survival. And all cancer cells have this characteristic. So going upstream into why did that mitochondria get so toxic where it can't burn oxygen for fuel anymore? That's the question. So what are all the things that damage the mitochondria? Well, that's what we talk about every week just about. Seed oils, processed sugar, processed grain, those are what we call the big three. Lack of minerals because of poor farming techniques and told to not eat salt. Stress, sitting, smoking, toxins in general, all the toxins in the sunscreen, glyphosate, air pollution, all these things, root canal toxins, mercury from silver fillings, all the contamination in the water, lead, arsenic, uranium, all of it toxic to your mitochondria. So that's the key with the sunscreen. It's just one more application that damages the mitochondria in the skin in particular. So when these sun rays come in, UVA, UVB, all the wavelength of sunlight, many which are beneficial because we're a solar panel that absorbs that and initiates a cascade of beneficial effects in the body. We love sunlight, but also there's some negative impact from those rays that creates oxidative stress, especially if your skin is saturated with seed oils. It's like a spark that went into gasoline and just poof, massive oxidative storm when you have seed oil infested skin cells. And then your antioxidant enzymes, these are guys that come in like fire extinguishers and put out the free radical oxidative stress. Well, the antioxidant enzymes in a standard American are shut down because of lack of minerals, extra iron from iron fortified foods, lack of magnesium, lack of retinol, saturated fat, vitamin A. We've turned off our fire extinguishers We've ramped up our oxidative stress production, where our mitochondria is just barely even chugging along at low miles per gallon. And then boom, that sunscreen consistent application pushes that mitochondria over the edge, can't defend itself. You've got a toxic cell. It's flipped a cancer switch. It's got anaerobic metabolism going now as a survival switch mechanism. That's the theory. And that's what my conclusion is based off all the evidence. So get back to how your great-great-granddads who were out in the sun all day long, they were full of tallow and lard and coconut oil and avocado oil, olive oil, real butter, heavy cream. They were mineral rich because their food was mineral rich. One apple in 1950 got you all the minerals that 26 apples it took in 1997 to equal one apple. So get back to vine wrapping, fresh picked, homegrown, regenerative ag produced produce as best you can. Eat the organ meats that our ancestors used to eat. That's where all the minerals and vitamins are at, in the liver, kidney, spleen. We don't eat those anymore. So it's all these basic things. Okay. Well, that took up half the show. Dr. Cowan, Human Heart, Cosmic Heart. If you didn't hear the interview last week, I encourage you to go listen to it and maybe go pull up the original interview from a few years ago with Dr. Cowan. All those are archived on our website. Go to the heart disease tab on the podcast tab, topic, boom, heart disease. There's a bunch of interviews on heart disease. Go find Tom Cowan's first one. Listen to that also. I'm going to try to connect these dots all the way back around real quick. Hopefully I don't talk too fast, but I'm going to have to kind of, because it's a lot to get through. Where did this whole cholesterol theory come from? The early 1900s, there was no interest in cholesterol and saturated fat as a potential cause for heart attacks. Why was that? Because in the early 1900s, there were no heart attacks. It wasn't a thing. First one was 1912. So then someone decided to study some rabbits, which are herbivores. They fed these rabbits a pure cholesterol diet from chicken eggs for 3 months. And it caused lipid deposits or fat deposits in the aorta of the rabbits. Mind you, these were 5 times higher dietary cholesterol levels than were found in the blood of humans. And also of note, rabbits are herbivores and we're not. So 2 important factors there. But there were lipid deposits, fat deposits in the aorta of these rabbits. So that was the very first study ever even thinking about fat, saturated fat, and blockage of arteries. However, this could not be reproduced in studies on omnivores or carnivores. But that is the very first study that I could find regarding this topic. So moving on later, this was in the 1950s, Ancel Keys presented a theory of saturated fat causing heart disease. And Dr. Keys invented the K rations for World War II so the soldiers could eat. And he was famous for that and was given some prize for that, I think. But the nation loved Dr. Keys because he was accredited with helping us win the war. So people respected Dr. Keys, kind of a national hero. Interesting to note, he was a fish physiologist, PhD in economics. BA in economics, Bachelor of Art in economics, PhD in physiology, fish physiology, but wasn't a doctor, wasn't really a cholesterol expert, but he published his study. And he did it after he was observing some data that looked to him like the countries that eat the least amount of saturated fat have the most heart attacks. And he produced a study with a graph. And if you've seen my lecture on heart disease, you've seen this graph. Or you can probably Google it. It's Ancel Keys, 1953 Journal of the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. And he shows this relationship. So on this graph shows Japan at the very bottom for heart disease deaths. And they have the least amount of consumption of saturated fat in their national diet. And then it goes up a little bit to Italy, who has a little more saturated fat and a little more heart attacks. In England and Wales, a little bit more saturated fat, a little more heart attack. Then Australia, then Canada, then the USA at the very top. The most saturated fat consumption, the most heart attacks. So that's called correlation. Looked really convincing. And it's called the 7 countries study. And that was it. He published that study. President Eisenhower at the time had a heart attack and everybody was freaked out a little bit. And they asked Ancel Keys his opinion. He told him his opinion is this, the saturated fat theory, produced this study. And the press went with it, put him on the cover of Time magazine. That was in January of 1961. And this theory was promoted. Later, it was discovered that those 7 countries I just mentioned, Japan, Italy, England, Wales, Australia, Canada, USA, that he showed this beautiful graph that proved his theory. It turns out those were cherry-picked countries. There were 15 other countries, so 22 in total, and he just removed those other 15 countries because they were the opposite. France actually had the highest saturated fat consumption, the lowest heart attacks. Well, that didn't fit his theory, so he just removed that from the graph, from his data set. So it was corruption. It was a lie. Why did he do that? I don't know. I can't judge a man's heart. But that's just where this whole thing started. Very interesting that right after that, a lot of doctors are like, wait a minute, how could this be? My patients have been eating saturated fat, lard, tallow, and real butter for a long time with no heart attacks. So I'm questioning this. So when any groundbreaking paradigm shifting study comes out, we need to replicate it. So they went to replicate this. The Minnesota Coronary Artery Experiment, 1968 to 1973, 9,000 patients. It was a randomized controlled trial. Half of those 9,000 patients got put into the group that got to eat regular saturated animal fat. The other half got put into the group that ate polyunsaturated plant oil, aka seed oils, PUFA, cottonseed oil, canola oil, soybean oil, corn oil. That's what the other group got. What they found, LDL cholesterol went down in the plant oil group, but there was no change in cardiovascular death. And actually, all-cause mortality went up. For every 1% drop in cholesterol, there was a 1% increase in mortality in the plant oil, vegetable seed oil group. That didn't fit the theory. It wasn't consistent with Ancel Keys' hypothesis and theory. So that just wasn't published. Guys, that's called publication bias. If your study you just funded doesn't fit what you thought it was going to, the outcome that you thought would be, that would support the product you're trying to sell, then you just don't publish it. So it went into the filing cabinet for 40 years. 2016, it finally came out of the filing cabinet. Okay, so right after that, the Sydney Diet Heart Study tried to confirm Dr. Keys' hypothesis. Randomized controlled trial, same results as the Minnesota experiment. LDL did go down, but mortality went up. Okay, so there we are, 1950s, 60s, 70s. That's when this whole thing started. That's what it was based on. That's the foundation of this cholesterol theory of heart disease. And it's just not accurate. And I'm going to go through some studies that would bring more question marks to your mind as to the accuracy of this cholesterol saturated fat theory. Here's an article from 1981, Cholesterol, Coconuts, and the Diet on Polynesian Islands, a natural experiment, the Puka Puka and Toluki Island studies. Dr. Pryor was the lead author. And pulling from that article, this is in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, volume 34. Quote, vascular disease is uncommon in both populations, and there is no evidence of the high saturated fat intake having a harmful effect in these populations. So obviously coconuts are high in saturated fat. And the point of the study, they have very little to no heart disease. Here's another study. This is Dr. Ho, MD, was a lead author. Alaskan Arctic Eskimos' response to a customary high-fat diet is the name of the article. Quoting from the article, the Eskimo tends to develop atherosclerotic heart disease at a much slower rate than the general U.S. population. The rate of ischemic heart disease among 779 North Slope Eskimos is approximately 5 out of 1,000. This is to be compared with an incidence of 50 out of 1,000 among the American population. The article, of course, went on to go through the diet of the Eskimo, and it was a high fat diet, saturated fat diet. Here's another article. Dr. George Mann was a lead author. The name of the article, Studies of a Surfactant and Cholesterolemia in the Maasai. So this is in Africa, the Maasai tribe. The immunity of the Maasai male to clinical forms of coronary artery disease has been established by our previous studies. See footnote 1. The Maasai have low levels of serum cholesterol and a low prevalence of clinical coronary disease despite the diet of milk and meat, which is alleged to be cause of coronary heart disease in the Western man. Here's another article. This is from 1966. The name of the article, Familial Hypercholesterolemia, a Genetic and Metabolic Study. Dr. Harlan's the lead author. This is in the journal Medicine. Familial hypercholesterolemia just means there's a genetic mutation that causes certain family trees to have super high cholesterol. So if really high cholesterol causes heart attacks, you'd expect these family trees to have a whole lot more heart attacks and death from heart disease. So they studied some of these families here, and that was the point of this article. Quote, our studies provide no evidence that familial hypercholesterolemia appreciably shortens the life of affected individuals, either male or female. On the contrary, they show that the high levels of serum cholesterol are clearly compatible with survival into the 7th and 8th decades. Here's another article regarding familial hypercholesterolemia, British Medical Journal, 2001. 1800 to 9, the name of the article, mortality over 2 centuries in large pedigree with familial hypercholesterolemia, a family tree mortality study. Dr. Siegebrands is a lead author. From 1800, they look back into the 1800s through the 1900s, and what they showed was high cholesterol provided a survival advantage. In these family trees with high cholesterol from familial genetic high cholesterol, less cancer death, less infectious disease death, and better overall health. Quoting directly from the article, implications. People in the first generations of our pedigree reached old age. Hypercholesterolemia may have conferred a survival advantage. Next article, again on hypercholesterolemia. This is from Journal of American Heart Association 2014. Dr. Mundahl is the lead author. The name of the article, Mortality Among Patients with Familial Hypercholesterolemia, a registry-based study in Norway, 1992 to 2010. The summary of this article is there were no statistically significant differences in heart disease death in the folks in the family trees with the genetic high cholesterol. Normal rates of death from heart disease and much less cancer and infectious disease deaths was noted. Next article, Lancet, 2001, lead authors, Dr. Schatz. Name of the article, Cholesterol and All-Cause Mortality in Elderly People from the Honolulu Heart Program, a cohort study. From the discussion paragraph, quote, our data accord with previous findings of increased mortality in elderly people with low serum cholesterol, and show that long-term persistence of low cholesterol concentration actually increases risk of death. Next article, Annals of Nutrition and Metabolism, 2009. Dr. Seekef is the lead author. The name of the article, Dietary Fat and Coronary Heart Disease. Summary of evidence from prospective cohort and randomized controlled trials. The summary takeaway, intake of total fat was not significantly associated with coronary events, heart attacks, or mortality. Intake of saturated fat, animal fat, was not significantly associated with coronary events or mortality. Fatal heart disease was not reduced by low-fat diets or by replacing saturated animal fats with polyunsaturated vegetable oil fats. Next article, American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, 2010, meta-analysis. Dr. Siri Torino, lead author. The title of the article, Meta-analysis of prospective cohort studies evaluating the association of saturated fat with cardiovascular disease. Takeaway, a large meta-analysis of prospective studies involving close to 350,000 participants found no association between saturated fat and heart disease. Next article, American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, 2010. Title, Dietary Intake of Saturated Fatty Acids and Mortality from Cardiovascular Disease in Japanese. the Japan Collaborative Cohort Study for Evaluation of Cancer Risk Study. Dr. Yamagishi, lead author. A Japanese prospective study that followed 58,000 men for 14 years found no association between saturated fat intake and heart disease, and an inverse association between saturated fat and stroke, i.e., those who ate more saturated fat had a lower risk of stroke. Next article, egg consumption and the risk of coronary heart disease and stroke. Dose response meta-analysis of a prospective cohort studies, lead author, Dr. Wrong. The discussion, this is from British Medical Journal, January 2013. Discussion, quote, this meta-analysis identified no significant association between egg consumption and risk of coronary heart disease or stroke. Next article, Open Heart Journal 2015, title, evidence from randomized controlled trials did not support the introduction of dietary fat guidelines in 1977 and 1983, a systemic review and meta-analysis. So this study in 2015, published in Open Heart, went back to look for the original data for that the government relied on to give us the low-fat dietary guidelines that first came out in 1977. They went to look for that data. Where was that data that the government used to give us these guidelines? Quoting from the study, quote, two recent publications have questioned the alleged relationship between saturated fat and coronary artery disease and called for dietary guidelines to be reconsidered. The present review concludes that dietary advice not merely needs review, it should not have been introduced. Translation, they couldn't find the data to support the 1977 guidelines of low-fat diet recommendations. Next article, British Medical Journal 2016, the title, lack of an association or an inverse association between low-density lipoprotein cholesterol and mortality in the elderly, a systemic review. Dr. Ravznoskov, lead author, quote, since elderly people with high LDL cholesterol live as long or longer than those with low LDL cholesterol, our analysis provides a reason to question the validity of this cholesterol hypothesis. Next article, 2019 study, scientific reports tracked 12.8 million Koreans for 10 years. The results showed that below a certain level, which was a level of 200, the lower the total cholesterol level, the higher the all-cause mortality. The title of that article was Total Cholesterol and All-Cause Mortality by Sex and Age, a prospective cohort study among 12.8 million adults, February 2019. I think y'all get the point. I've got even more articles, but I'll just do two more real quick. This was August of 2020, the Journal American College of Cardiology, pretty big journal. Most cardiologists really respect the journal. And it was a review, state-of-the-art review, specifically is what it's called. Saturated fats and health, a reassessment and proposal for food-based recommendations. Again, this is August of 20. The conclusions of this systemic review. Several foods relatively rich in saturated fatty acids, such as whole-fat dairy, dark chocolate, and unprocessed meat, are not associated with an increased cardiovascular disease or diabetes risk. There is no robust evidence that current guidelines for putting a limit on saturated fat consumption in the United States will prevent cardiovascular disease or reduce mortality. Next article, March of 22, JAMA. Title, Evaluating the Association Between Low-Density Lipoprotein Cholesterol Reduction and Relative and Absolute Effects of Statin Treatment, a Systemic Review and Meta-Analysis. Again, this is JAMA, March of 22. What they did was go back and review all the cholesterol statin drug studies. Just taking that statin drug every day to get your cholesterol low, create the outcomes that we wanted, less heart attack and less death from heart attack and less overall death. Yes, they do. But by how much? Let's see here. Quoting from the article, in this meta-analysis of 21 randomized controlled trials, We examined the efficacy of statins in reducing total mortality and cardiovascular outcomes. There was significant heterogeneity, but also reductions in the absolute risk of all-cause mortality, 0.8%. Heart attack or myocardial infarction, heart attack reduction, 1.3%, and stroke reduction, 0.4%. So, yep, the statins reduce heart attacks by 1.3%, stroke by 0.4%, all-cause mortality, 0.8%. Okay, we're going to stop right there. How could the statins benefit, but why do they benefit so little? There's other studies that point to the fact that the statin drugs have a little bit of anti-inflammatory effect, meaning they can lower inflammation a little bit, like taking an ibuprofen lowers inflammation in a certain way, in a certain mechanism, just like Celebrex does and steroids do and other things do. Well, statins have that one good side effect is they can drop inflammation a little bit. And that's what those other studies have shown is the beneficial effect, the 0.8% reduction, the little bitty bit reduction in death by taking a statin is because of that anti-inflammatory effect. It lowers the CRP, the inflammatory marker CRP. It lowers inflammation in the body. The benefit is not because it dropped your cholesterol from 250 to 190. I just read all those articles to you that tell you it's better to be above 200 if you want to live longer and healthier, have less cancer, less death from everything, less infectious disease death, less dementia. So there's a little tiny anti-inflammatory effect. So that leads us to inflammation. We now know that this cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, can be big fluffy or small dense. Big fluffy is your natural God-given cholesterol. It's not inflamed and it's actually beneficial for you. It has a job to do. It's a vital nutrient in the body. You die without it. But we need your God version of it, God-given version of it, big fluffy, pattern A. That cholesterol can undergo, that LDL cholesterol can undergo a transformation process where it actually physically changes to a small, dense LDL and it's inflamed. Big fluffy cotton ball, not inflamed. Small, dense BB, inflamed. You can actually check that on a blood test, and our blood test at Veritas does that. If you want to know yours, get a Veritas blood panel. You can do that online through our wellness program. If you have a Quest Labs near you, just get on, join, be a member, buy the blood panel, and you'll know. Are you big fluffy or small dense? So what gets you from big fluffy to small dense and inflamed? Sitting, smoking, stress, sugar, processed grains, seed oils, all the S's. So don't be a standard American, and your LDL will be big, fluffy, and healthy, not associated with heart attack. Okay? That's what your great-grandparents were. They're big, fluffy LDL. And we actually need a lot of it. We need it to be above 200 total cholesterol. We just went through that. Okay? So you need to understand that inflammation's a part of this. The standard American diet and lifestyle drive inflammation. So that's a part. So let's remember back to Dr. Tom Cowan when he explained that the physics of the heart as a pressure pump just don't work out. The flow dynamics, how fluid flows through a closed container through a pipe, those dynamics and physics of that just don't work. Period. A hydraulic pump that creates a suction effect and pulls the fluid through that system of vessels, that works. Those equations work out. That physics works. Okay. So that's a key part of it, that the heart's not a pressure pump. It's a suctioning pump. It's a hydraulic. It's pulling the blood through your vessels. Okay. So remember that piece. Remember the structured water piece. So in those pipes, your blood's flowing through the pipe. The actual part of your blood that's touching the wall is a watery part of your blood that should have a charge to it. It's that structured water that's like the liquidy, jello-y type water, liquid crystal, exclusion zone water. Dr. Pollack calls it easy water, structured water, the fourth phase of water. H3O2 has energy, has a charge, has a negative charge to it. That negative charge of the water on the outer part of the blood that's flowing through your pipe, the outer section of that blood, that watery part, is negatively charged. The red blood cells are negatively charged. The actual inner lining of the pipe is negatively charged. That inner lining is called the glycocalyx. It's a combination of these polysaccharides with some intermingled structured water, liquid crystal jello type gelatin material with a negative charge. So negative to negative, you have a negative charge in the watery part of your blood and the red blood cells. You have a negative charge in your glycocalyx. Those are going to repel each other. That repulsion off the wall of your artery, plus the suction, imagine sucking through a straw. It's going to allow that flow to go beautifully. So your heart is sucking things through, hydraulic pump, suction action. You got a negative charge in your glycocalyx pushing that blood through, repelling it. It's an incredible engineering marvel. Absolutely incredible. The guys down the oil field in the fracking, if they'd study this, maybe they have, I don't know. But the physics of that's just amazing, the efficiency of it. Okay, so that's key. These are key concepts. The heart's a hydraulic suction forces created inside your vessels. The glycocalyx has a negative charge with structured water intermingled in it. The blood has a negative charge with structured water on the outer part of the blood that touches the wall. And all that makes this thing go, okay? That's beautiful. You will never have a heart attack or stroke when all that's operating like it's supposed to. So here's what happens. As you do your standard American living, sitting, stressing, processed sugar, processed sifted grain, seed oils, smoking, all those things, spike protein, heavy metal toxins, lack of movement, lack of sunshine, all of that causes the charge in your structured water to lessen. It's like a battery. I just went to air up my lawnmower tire and I have a portable air compressor. Hit the button and nothing happened. And I looked at that battery indicator light and it was all the way down at the bottom. That's what's happening to your structured water. It's losing charge, and like a battery losing charge. When you lose that charge, that negative charge in the glycocalyx along the wall, and you lose it in the blood, now suddenly that blood's not flowing smoothly through the vessel, nice and crisp and smooth and clean and quickly. It's actually bumping up against that wall. And then things in the blood, heavy metals that are associated with heart disease, microplastics that now we're finding in the plaque, lead. We've found lead in coronary artery blockage plaque. A root canal bacteria we have found in the coronary artery blockage plaque, spike protein in these coronary plaques. So all this stuff in the blood now is not being repelled off the wall. It's actually touching the wall, scraping the wall, hitting that wall. And the wall, once your glycocalyx has lost its charge and it starts to shrink and basically gets mowed down, think of long grass in your yard versus you put the mower on level 1 and you just scalp your yard, or think a long shag carpet versus that real thin carpet. That's what's happening inside your wall of your blood vessel. The glycocalyx is damaged and mowed down to nothing, and it's lost its negative charge. So you got all kinds of things scraping against that wall. So this charge and structured water concept is huge to understand. So now you have all this debris scraping the wall. Well, that wall, that's endothelium, that's skin. So imagine just scraping the top of my hand right here with my fingernails, or a razor blade, or heavy metals, or all kinds of stuff. You get little nicks, little scrapes, little cuts, little paper cuts. That happens inside your pipes of your coronary arteries. So the body goes to patch that, literally put a patch on it. That's plaque. That's the cholesterol. That's the coronary calcium scores that you get, that calcium being laid down, hardening of the arteries, all that blockage, quote unquote. All that is a patch job on this damaged artery. And that patch actually is fine, does a great job, keeps you alive. But if the process keeps happening, if you keep being a standard American and that process continues, you're going to patch it and patch it and patch it. Well, that patch job gets more and more and more and starts to narrow that artery down. So you're not getting good blood flow downstream. Well, guess what? The heart muscle cells downstream now are starving for oxygen. What's going on? Who turned off the spigot upstream? Those muscle cells send a signal upstream and say, hey guys, we need more irrigation down here. Your body sprouts a new artery. It's called a collateral. Your body grows a bypass around that blockage all by itself. It's incredible design. So you're just making new arteries now around that patch job, around that blockage. It's amazing. Remember, so that you can live with that blockage. Here's where the problem goes. If that plaque, if that patch job gets inflamed, and how would it get inflamed? Seed oil, sitting, stressing, sugar, glyphosate, heavy metals, all the things. If you don't cut off this pro-inflammatory diet and lifestyle, you're going to inflame that plaque. Inflamed patch job can rupture. Think of a pimple on your face, on your skin, and it's super inflamed, full of pus, all red and hot and hurts, and you pop that thing and rupture. That's what happens inside your skin, inside your coronary vessel. They're called arthromas, inflamed plaque. They rupture, and boom, that's like a blowout on your tire. Well, when you blow out an inflamed plaque inside your coronary, that's a massive signal gets sent to your platelets to clot off. We've just blew a leak, and it brings a massive blood clot action into that coronary artery. Right in that moment, we're talking instantaneous blood clot, boom, that's a heart attack. The blood clot being formed immediately, that's a myocardial infarction heart attack. You immediately block all downstream blood flow aggressively. That's how it works. So as you can see, inflammation is a big part, but even upstream from that is what's causing your negative charge to disappear in your blood and in your glycocalyx. Here's the last piece of this. Why do we just have heart attacks in our coronary, in our heart? Stroke, we can have a brain attack and a heart attack, but we have these vessels all through the body. Why don't we have kidney attack, spleen attack, like Dr. Cowan was saying? And here's where we didn't really explain last week. The actual tissue, which is heart muscle cells, that's what your coronary arteries are feeding. The widowmaker, the LAD, that main pipe that comes down, that's feeding, nourishing, bringing nutrients and oxygen in particular to the actual muscle itself. So your heart can beat every second, every day of your life till you die. It never gets to rest. It needs good oxygen all the time, good nutrition, good hydration all the time coming to it. So the coronaries are feeding this very energy dependent tissue. The brain is very energy dependent and the heart is very energy dependent. So imagine this contraction of a muscle. Imagine your calf muscle. You're jogging. That muscle's just contract, relax, contract, relax, contract, relax, contract. And then boom, it's done. It's toast. It flips into anaerobic metabolism, just like the cancer cell will. It does that, creates lactic acid, and that causes pain and a cramp. And you're going to quit running, and you're going to lay on the ground. And if you're like me, you're going to cry because I'm a weenie. And that lactic acid causes those muscle cells to spasm down and cramp. Okay, back to the heart muscle. Same thing. Except your heart muscle never gets a break. You can't just lay down and cry. It has to beat every second of every moment of your life. So translation, that heart muscle cell, those mitochondria have to be super efficient. They have to be able to take fat or sugar and oxygen and burn it for energy. It cannot get inefficient. If that heart muscle cell gets inefficient, that mitochondria goes south. It can't keep up. It can't spit out enough energy production. It starts choking down, and it flips that switch to anaerobic without oxygen, and it starts making lactic acid. It will spasm down. You get enough cardiac muscle cells at one time flipping anaerobic, and you get enough lactic acid production, and those muscle cells can no longer contract. They're just cramped down. That's chest pain. and they're just stuck there. The actual wall of that muscle quits moving, or it's moving abnormally or not moving at all. That creates this is where it gets it gets a little tricky. That creates a force on the coronary artery walls. Remember, these coronary arteries are all embedded in this muscle. It's like a root ball. All these coronaries are just moving all through this. They're intermingled through all these muscle fibers of your heart. And when that muscle quits squeezing because it's in lactic acid spasm, the blood flow in those arteries is compromised even more. So it's this perfect storm. You actually start to get a collapse of the coronary artery wall. Remember, the negative charge helps keep the wall open, repelling, and the fluid flowing because there's a suction force. That hydraulic heart pump is sucking. Well, why doesn't your coronary artery just collapse on itself like a straw? If you sucked real hard, you collapse the straw. Well, it's not, because it's a healthy glycocalyx with a negative charge. But in a standard American, you've damaged the glycocalyx. There's no negative charge, no repelling. It's a weakened wall. It's a damaged wall. All the plaque and buildup, all the calcium, all the hardening of the artery, that's the body trying to keep the wall stiff, hard, and open, because there's a sucking force in there. That hydraulic pump is that coronary. Well, when the muscle goes into lactic acid, the cardiac muscle goes lactic acid spasm cramp, and you've already got a weakened glycocalyx, damaged wall, plaque buildup, boom, collapse happens. It's this perfect storm. So it's a combination of the heart muscle mitochondria being damaged and inefficient, along with glycocalyx being damaged, the actual vessel being damaged. But you got to have both. Your body can actually put that repair job to work, and you can walk around with plaque buildup all day long, as long as it's not inflamed too much, and as long as you're building those collaterals. But it's this combination of inflammation on that plaque and oxidative stress inflammation in the mitochondria, where it spasms into anaerobic metabolism. That's what Dr. Cowan really goes through deeply in his book. I just kind of gave the summary, but you can read the book and get all the nuts and bolts and the detail of it. It's a beautiful theory. It makes way more sense than the current cholesterol saturated fat theory. Even in the book, he goes through how could a statin help at all, which I already mentioned that, it's anti-inflammatory. How do beta blockers and ACE inhibitors and nitroglycerin help at all? Those are your three top meds. How does aspirin help? He goes through each one of those drugs. Well, the effect those have is mostly on, and we'll wrap this thing up, the autopilot nervous system, the sympathetic, that vagus nerve. We haven't talked about this in a while. Autopilot, that's your fight or flight, rest and digest. It's not under your voluntary control. It's under the programming of your heart beliefs. What you believe in your heart about a circumstance, situation, relationship, an email, a conversation, a news reel, a social media reel, whatever, how you interpret and think, that's going to flip your vagus fight or flight or rest and digest. Those are the only two, first gear, second gear. That vagus nerve is what controls that heart muscle beating. If your vagus nerve sits in first gear too long, fight or flight, stress, tension, fear, worry, anxiety, angst, lack of peace. Think of it as you're pushing the pedal to the metal on your gas pedal, and your RPMs is revved way over into the red line, and you didn't shift gears, and you're redlining that thing. If you're constantly, every day, week, month, year after year after year, you're pushing too much on fight or flight, fight or flight, flight or flight, through the vagus nerve to your heart muscle that's contracting, that adrenaline surge all the time, too much on that muscle cell, on that mitochondria, your carburetor in your heart muscle cell, damages your carburetor. It makes that carburetor sick. It cannot take the oxygen, the carbohydrate, or the fat to burn it for energy. That is a key piece of this puzzle. Where if you actually were in rest and digest, true peace mode, even if you're eating the wrong food, and sitting too much and smoking too much and all the things. If you were truly at peace, I think you'd actually be okay. Now, that doesn't mean go eat cottonseed oil and glyphosate and mercury fillings and all that. I'm just saying that's how important this piece of the puzzle is. So many heart attacks are after an adrenaline surge, after a bad argument, after the Super Bowl. They have stats on this. There's published studies on these adrenaline surges after shoveling snow, different things. That adrenaline surge is a key component of this. So it's multifaceted, lots of components. You need to eat real food. You need good salt for mineralization. You need good water. You need good sunshine because the sunshine structures the water, brings a charge. You need grounding that charges your structured water up. Resistance training structures that water up and cleans up your mitochondria. You need good oxygen all night long, meaning good sleep, no sleep apnea. You need all the things, and you need true peace. So it's this huge, just multifaceted, complex, beautiful. And I want to try to just lay all that out a little more clearly because we didn't get to all that last week. And all the other things Dr. Cowan said, that some of I'm still processing, probably you are too. And if some of that you didn't agree with, fine. That's no big deal. But we have freedom to think outside the box, get creative, be critical thinking, go test it, question the current theories. Remember, we're the sickest country in the world getting the worst outcomes based off all our current modern medical theories, like lather up with sunscreen to prevent skin cancer. Oops, it actually increases skin cancer rates. Take an Alzheimer's drug to rip amyloid beta plaque out of your brain. Oops, that actually increases bleeding and death, doesn't improve outcomes at all. Even though we spent billions of dollars on that research for amyloid beta plaque, that original study in Nature was fraud. Amyloid beta plaque, the plaque in the brain of an Alzheimer's, just like in the coronary arteries, is a protective mechanism trying to deal with the oxidative stress in the brain neurons dumping out too much oxidative stress. So that theory of amyloid beta plaque, that was wrong. Serotonin theory of depression, we've talked about in the past. So just all these theories in modern medicine, we're too slow to change our thinking. We're too slow to question the norm and the narrative. We're too slow to look at ourselves as a medical profession, say, what are we getting right? What are we getting wrong? And let's change when we're wrong. When a new study comes out that says sunscreen increases risk, let's add that to our article. And, granted, maybe the TMA author didn't see that study. It just came out recently. So, but I might write a letter to that guy, a letter to the editor and see if they'll add that in or do another article. I have a feeling they may not because of pride and because of money. When we actually start to question some things, if you're a head of a dermatology somewhere, and I'm not talking about the local person quoted in the article, let's just pick something else. If you're the head of endocrinology somewhere and an article comes out that says all these diabetes meds don't actually decrease risk of heart attack, stroke, dialysis, neuropathy, and retinopathy, and all the things, and if you actually say that, I mean, your job's could be on the line. What do you mean? Your livelihood, your reputation. So, I mean, all that comes into play too. And actually, there is a study that says that very thing about diabetes meds. Okay, guys. So I got to wrap it up. We're over time. Hopefully that helped bring a little more clarity and connected some dots for you on heart disease. All those studies I quoted, guys, are actually in a video lecture. You can see those studies. I have a lecture on heart disease on the wellness platform. You can go back and listen to all those podcasts under the heart disease category on our website. All that's free, of course. We have probably 14 years of podcasts and radio shows. The wellness program curates all that, summarizes all that, puts it in a neat little sections and boxes and drop downs and all that to help guide you through because a doctor can't fix you. Conventional or alternative. God put the fix inside of you. You got to unleash it. You got to understand you're a spirit housed in the flesh with a soul. You got to renew the mind of your soul to line up with Jesus, the mind of Christ. When you see your spouse or your coworker or your president or your congressman or your mayor or your doctor or your ex-wife or whoever you see, or you read a conversation or hear something, what lens is that going through? And is it the lens of Jesus? We need Jesus goggles. Jesus lenses on everything. The Pharisees couldn't see it. The woman caught in adultery, They didn't have Jesus lenses. He came to give us his lenses. He brought the kingdom, his viewpoint, the way. The world messes us up. Religion messes us up. All these things. We've got to be humble and be willing to change our thinking. Jesus said it, repent, metanoia, change your thinking. We have to be humble like a child willing to learn a different thing, a new thing. So anyways, we'll see y'all next week with another great show. This will be archived on the website. We'd love for you to join veritaswellnessmember.com to learn the truth about all these different diseases and how to steward that mitochondria, steward your 4 pillars: nutrition, hydration, movement, and peace. We don't have it all figured out, but we do have a lot of it figured out from our experience and have learned what not to do. And that's the beauty of it. Your great-great-great-grandparents who didn't have skin cancer or heart attacks, they didn't know anything that I just talked about today. And you don't have to know it either, except that we've submitted to a spirit of intellectualism and scientism, and we won't believe anything unless it's in a published study. So that's why I spend this time going through all these studies to try to prove to your intellect that there's a way that seemeth right to a man, and in the end it leads to death. Don't just eat from the tree of knowledge to try to find peace and joy and long life and health and happiness and all the things. No, that only comes from the tree of life. Jesus came to give us a life more abundant, the quality of life that the giver of it has. Jesus came to give us God's quality of life. And we actually already have it in our spirit, man, but we're living over here out of our soul, man. Our intellect, our own smarts, our own thinking, and our emotions. That's your soul. Your emotion and your what you were taught by religion and school and culture and parents and media. Our whole world, the world teaches our soul stuff. We believe it because no one taught us the difference between soul and spirit. The Bible's clear. The word of God's sharper than a two-edged sword, separating soul and spirit. We've got to bring that truth, but the word's not just this written thing. It's Holy Spirit writing truth on your heart. That's a missing piece of a lot of religious denominational. You got to have the Holy Spirit interpret that written thing. Okay. I'm starting to preach now, so I need to save that till next week. Love you guys. Go be who God made you to be. God loves you. He put you on the earth to be a mouthpiece for him, but it's his words, not yours. So die to yourself and your soulish ways and your own thinking and your own emotion. Let the Spirit fill you and lead you and guide you every day. Abide in the vine. Get your marching orders like Jesus every day. Only do and say what you see your Father doing and saying. I actually think we're supposed to do that too. But it's him in us. It's not us. We got to die. We got to realize we're nothing except we're sons. But in our own self, we're nothing. And it'll be a disaster if we just keep walking in that tree of knowledge. All right. Thanks, guys.